Hello and welcome. Today we're making the first in a few pumpkin related recipes. This one is for pumpkin bread. While it does have a lot of ingredients, it's actually super simple to make and only takes a little bit of hands-on time. So as always, I'd like to thank everyone who has liked and subscribed and have been watching and sharing the videos. It really helps the channel grow. And if you have not already subscribed and enjoy this video, subscribe for more like it and other things. Now, for our ingredients, we will need 3 cups all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon salt, 1 teaspoon baking soda, 1 teaspoon baking powder, 1 tablespoon ground cinnamon, 1 teaspoon nutmeg, 1 teaspoon ground clove, 1 teaspoon ground ginger, 3 eggs, 1 cup vegetable oil, 1 teaspoon vanilla extract or vanillin, 1 15-ounce can of pumpkin puree or a half of one of the 29-ounce cans, and finally 2 1/4 cups of sugar that escaped the picture and has been on the run ever since. Before you mix anything, grease and flour your loaf pan or pans if you're using 2, and make sure you preheat your oven to 400 degrees. So, for our start, we need to mix our dry ingredients a bit just to make sure they're evenly dispersed and help break up any possible clumps. The main reason we want to do this is our batter is going to be very, very thick, and it would be a lot harder to make sure everything's mixed if we didn't do it at this point. Once that is all mixed, we are ready for our wet ingredients. So, here is a great example of what not to do. I figured I could get a bit of an extra mix going on, sort of a pseudo creaming of the butter effect by not adding the pumpkin yet. It turned out to be more of a thick paste climbs your hand mixer effect. So don't do this, and I sure won't be doing this the next time I make this either. Alright, and with our pumpkin that we totally added at the beginning of the mixing phase, the entire mix gets a whole lot easier to, well, get mixed. Now the reason I'm using a hand mixer is because this recipe is going to make a super stiff batter. That means we can get some extra air into it, and that's going to give us a lighter, more fluffy bread with a slightly crispier outside since we'll have so many micro bubbles throughout the whole mixture. I'll explain a little bit about that later. It will possibly take about an extra 3 to 5 minutes to get it mixed all the way in. It took mine a little bit less than 5, so it shouldn't be too long to get smooth. Alright, now we can put it in our loaf pan. If we look here where I took out the batter, you can see all the little tiny micro bubbles that we mixed in, and since it's so thick, these will stay in our batter and make it all the way to the final product. So mixing is really important for your texture. Less mixing is going to give you a denser result, and more mixing is going to give you a finer, lighter result. With batter this thick, you'll also need to smooth the top out if you don't want any cracking. I left all the textures on the top from mine from glopping it in the pan so that I could get a really nice cracking, and you can kind of control what the cracking pattern is if you want to sort of trace that out on the top, because the batter is that thick. It will sort of crack into whatever your pattern that you sort of dig into the batter with. Into our preheated oven to 400 degrees we go. Once we've put our loaf in the pan, we want to turn that temperature back down to 350 degrees and bake for 45 minutes to 60 minutes. Because of how thick the batter is, this is probably going to take more towards the 60 minutes than the 45 in most cases. But it is important to start checking it at about 45 minutes. That way, if it is done, you're not going to get the bread over dried by just being in there baking for so long. Once your toothpick comes out clean, mine was about 1 hour and 5 minutes, you'll want to set this aside and let it cool for at least an hour with a light towel or paper towel covering it. This is going to allow the moisture to reabsorb back into the bread and allow you to get a nice clean cuts without having too much crumbling of the bread. Now, let's take a second to talk about the bubbles and how they're going to make the outside crispier, because I said I would explain that. As weird as it may sound, air is actually a very poor conductor of heat. So each of these bubbles acts as a tiny insulator for the next bubble over, essentially creating thousands of tiny layers that slow the transfer of heat. This gives our super thin outer layer the ability to get really crispy while not drying out the rest of it, because it takes so long for it to transfer its heat. So we get this thin layer on the outside that's super crispy, and then the rest of it stays moist and fluffy and exactly the way you want it. And with that, we have made some pumpkin bread. It took me a bit to get the flavor profile exactly where I wanted it, but the effort was totally worth it. I normally only make one of these loaves and then I freeze the other half for a couple weeks later. It freezes really well, and as long as you let it get back up to room temperature before you bake it, it really doesn't have any noticeable texture or flavor differences. It might be just a tiny bit denser, but nothing worth noticing. I know I say this every time, but you do really want to try this one. It has a really nice balanced flavor, super light and fluffy texture. So, as always, thank you for watching, and have a great day and a great meal.